today's presentation, as you can see, is mitigating cybersecurity and privacy risk of a remote workforce. I have about, 90 slides or so, and I'm going to try to work through these fairly quickly, and maybe we can get some questions in. But Jeff sends his regrets. He's actually working on trying to keep some of our clients going here this morning. So he asked me to take the reins and fill in for him. So it's going to be just little old me today. So hopefully we can learn a lot and get through a lot of slides and make this happen. So here we go. So here's the traditional disclaimer. This is informational. The presentation's informational, and this is not legal advice. So we'll just leave that there. So what are we going to talk about today? So all week, we've been working on helping clients manage their cybersecurity risk in this new kind of remote workforce environment. And Jeff and I spoke extensively and have been working on matters a lot this week together. And we thought, okay, what's the most important things that we can tell our clients in this time where, a lot of our clients are working from home? And I pulled up a lot of the presentations that I've done over the years. The most recent one was at Founders just not that long ago. And I said, well, let's take a look at this presentation and see if it's still relevant. And we flipped through our standard presentation that we continually update and continually keep fresh. And we looked at it and we thought, okay, this still applies. I mean, really, nothing has really changed that much. The basics of cybersecurity and privacy law really haven't changed. The basics of securing an IT environment haven't changed. The attack vectors in cybersecurity really haven't changed. They just maybe have morphed and become relevant in this COVID-19 era. So today I want to just flip through kind of cover the waterfront. I see there's over 100 attendees on this call, and they range from education to healthcare to manufacturing to, really the attendees on this call are a good snapshot of the client base of Miller Johnson. So this is going to try and do the same thing, right? So we're going to try to cover the waterfront. We're not going to go too deep in any one particular part of the law or area. But I'm here. I'm actually working from home, like a lot of folks probably are on this call. And my contact information will be here at the end. I'm happy to jump on a call and spend as much time as you want talking about any of these subjects at any time. So we'll go through cybersecurity by the numbers. Then we'll take a look at the law. Then we'll take a look at insurance. And then we'll take a look at sort of some basic cyber risk mitigation solutions, some practical things you can do now. The only caveat I have for the presentation is that, I'm not an IT person. I'll give you a little bit more background on myself. This isn't going to be a IT heavy presentation. There's plenty of presentations that cover the intricacies of IT security and cybersecurity in this remote workforce environment. There was a good one yesterday put on by the Cloud Security Alliance of West Michigan, and they may have the PowerPoint available. I was actually just looking for it before this presentation. But I'm a cybersecurity and privacy attorney at Miller Johnson. I'm a certified information privacy professional for the United States, which is the ANSI gold standard for certifications. And I've been working in privacy and cybersecurity law at Miller Johnson now for the past probably three and a half years. Jeff Muth and I started this practice group about 4 years ago now, and we realized that there was a big need and a big desire in West Michigan for West Michigan-based attorneys to provide good advice, good practical advice on cybersecurity and privacy law. And we've had a great success and a great time doing it, and I've developed a lot of great relationships in the community over the years, and it's been a lot of fun. So we handle my practice group at Miller Johnson handles everything from starting with privacy policies and procedures, where you put together a data breach response plan, you put together your bring your own device policy, you put together your IT privacy and security policies. We work on those. We also work on data breach response. So we've worked on dozens of data breaches over the last years. We've handled ransomware attacks and you name it. We've handled it. Major attacks that have ended up in federal criminal court to just minor phishing attacks. We also advise on cyber risk insurance and placing insurance, collecting on insurance, all of those things. And so our practice really does, run from A to Z. We've done it all, and we're kind of general practitioners in cybersecurity and privacy law, given our platform. So that's a little bit about us and a little bit about the presentation today. So let's get started. So I always like to start with the numbers. I like to start with the numbers related to privacy and data security, because I think it's important to understand the landscape and understand it from an objective perspective. And when I present in front of the West Michigan Cybersecurity Consortium, in front of 150 chief information security officers, I ask them, where's the data? Where do you go to find your best data? And they tell me that it's here with the Penniman Institute cost of a data breach report. The Verizon report is another good one that you may be familiar with. But let's just look at the average total cost of a data breach according to this data. And they, to create this report, they interviewed and did a survey of hundreds of companies ranging from small to medium-sized businesses to Fortune 500 companies. And so what you see is that the average size of a data breach involves about 25,000 records. The average total cost of a data breach is $3.92 million. The cost per record is about $150. Time to identify and contain a breach is set at about 279 days. And so, if someone's sitting on your network right now, they may have gotten, and they're about to expose themselves either by exfiltrating some data or taking down your network. They may have been there for the last 6 months. So these are the global averages, though. So they're skewed kind of on the high side. In West Michigan, here's where the data comes from. 570 companies studied, 3,000 individuals interviewed. What Jeff and I have found in West Michigan is that, the average cost of a data breach in hard numbers, and that's IT costs to contain the breach and remediate the breach and get everything back going. Those hard costs generally run anywhere from, $30,000 per breach, and we've dealt with breaches that have cost $300,000. We've seen breaches where companies have lost, $500,000 in, swept out of their bank account. And so, those numbers are skewed to the global averages. Our local averages are much smaller than that. However, if you do experience a catastrophic data breach at a large, billion-dollar company, that's where you get those numbers. So, the average cost of lost business for organizations in the 2019 study was $1.42 million. You can see that on your screen. I've left it up for a while. Lost business was the biggest contributor to the data breach. The life cycle of a data breach was longer. So, you know, it used to be 206 days and now it's 280 days. So I guess the bad guys are sitting on the networks a little bit longer in 2019. They say that having a data breach response plan and a data breach response team saved over 1.2 million. So I would say, to put that in West Michigan terms, I feel like having a good incident response team could actually save you. It could end up resulting in the cost of the data breach being zero. In fact, I know that the data breach responses that we've been on, sometimes they come in and they look like they're going to be catastrophic. We put the team together, including IT, HR, the C-suite, and outside legal, and then the forensic IT team, and then we stop it. And it costs essentially, $5,000 to $10,000 related in attorney time and outside IT costs. So planning is key. So the odds of experiencing a data breach have increased. If you look at the news today, the cybersecurity news, which I follow every day on various sources, you would think that the number of data breaches are increasing, and I think I don't know if that's true or not due to this COVID public health crisis, but my sense is that right now there's just a new flurry of attention being paid to the old phishing emails that have always gone out and the old Trojan horse malware phishing exercises that have kind of always happened. So just kind of walking through this, you can kind of see that the average total cost of a data breach in the healthcare industry is a bit higher. I know that there's some folks in healthcare on the call today, and probably everybody can understand that in the healthcare industry, data breaches are going to be more expensive. $204 per employee. Breach costs at organizations with between 500 and 1,000 employees have an average cost of $3,000 per employee. It goes down. The average cost per employee goes down with the size. But what we've found is that the smaller organizations feel like they're not a target, and that they don't have to worry about it as much, and it's not going to cost as much if it happens to them. However, a lot of times some of our smaller to medium-sized businesses experience a much more significant impact to daily operations when they have a data breach, because they're smaller and they just can't absorb the expense and the time and the distraction. So over time, you can kind of look, this chart is 2014 to 2019. You can see that, the average cost, total cost of a data breach is kind of hovering between, 3.5 and 4. That's been our experience too. Not much has changed over the last 4 or 5 years in terms of the cost of a data breach. Here's more on the total cost of a data breach by organizational size. You can see it's measured in millions. Less than 500 employees, 2.74 million. More than 25,000 employees, 5.11 million. So now we're kind of shifting from just what is it going to cost to the data breach root causes. So this one's a fun one every time I present on it to talk about, because I think, if you look at it, there's 3 categories: malicious or criminal attack, system glitch, and human error. What I like to say is that human error and then the malicious or criminal attack, the 24% and the 51%, you can kind of just add them together. And almost every criminal attack that we've seen, malicious criminal attack looking, directly for money. And I guess all of these attacks are criminal in some sense, but it all involves human error. I mean, risk mitigation efforts often, the best risk mitigation efforts are around reducing human error and training humans to not click on things that they shouldn't. So there's the broken down into categories. You know, you've got the total cost of a data breach broken down into categories. This is where, you know, a lot of people focus on, say, post-data breach lawsuits, right? I get a ton of calls to say, you know, we just had this data security incident. We think we've handled it. We're really nervous about lawsuits that are going to follow. We've never had, out of the dozens and dozens of data breaches we've worked on, we've never had really a lawsuit follow other than criminal investigation and criminal prosecution. Really, all the costs are baked into here. And this becomes important when we start looking at insurance, because you want insurance, cyber risk insurance, you want insurance to cover these costs. So the only way that you can place good cyber risk insurance is to understand where the costs come from, right? So you see detection and escalation as part of the cost of a data breach. The loss to business cost is baked in there. That's 36%. Post-breach cost is at 27%. And then you see notification. Data breach notification to affected individuals, you know, I would say out of all the breaches we've done, only, you know, a very small percentage actually require notification. And so, in fact, you know, when we use the word data breach on this call, I'm using it very loosely, but data breach has a legal definition in every state now, including the territories. And sometimes it's not called data breach, it's called data security breach or data security incident. Those costs are actually not that big. And this is something that Jeff and I try to tell folks is making Miller Johnson or any outside counsel who is experienced in privacy and cybersecurity as a part of your internal data breach response team is really not that expensive. When Jeff and I get involved, we tend to have a very light touch. It's the IT costs and the lost business costs and the post-breach remediation costs that are all wrapped up into IT, and it's all of those costs. I mean, you know, when we get involved, our meter is running, and I know we're not inexpensive, but it really, what we do is we coach the client through these issues so as to minimize the rest of the costs. And like I said, sometimes we have literally walked into what is the client has thought has been catastrophic, and we've done the analysis and we worked with the IT team, and we've found out that you know, there's been a much ado about nothing. So let's talk about COVID-19. I know everyone's kind of anxious to get into COVID-19. And, you know, if you're, like I said, if you're watching the news, you can kind of see that, you know, the human virus COVID-19 is wreaking havoc on businesses and families and everything throughout the nation. And it's also becoming fertile ground for attackers to use, right? Because now everyone's sitting on their laptops. A lot of people are working, millions of people are working remotely. A lot of them haven't been working remotely before. And you just constantly get updates related to the coronavirus. And, you know, I want to be responsive. I want to read things. I want to be, you know, up on the latest, especially for my clients. And, you know, maybe I'm going to click on things that I wouldn't have if I was sitting in my office and I could walk down the office hallway and just say, hey, you know, thanks for sending me that link. I'd love to chat with you about it. I'm just going to click on it because that's all I have. So, what we're seeing out there are are kind of the same old, with a new twist, the COVID-19 twist. It's social engineering. We've dealt with the data security incident where actually a local bank called up a CFO, said, "Hey, I'm interested in securing your account. Can you just walk through this online with me?" And the CFO walked through securing the payroll account with the supposed representative from the bank, and in the process entered in the credentials. After the phone call was done, the CFO felt actually pretty good about securing the account, and then the money disappeared about an hour later. So social engineering is a real thing. It happens to real people and smart people and educated people. And then we've got a lot of personal devices that are connecting to networks. When you're working remotely, people may be hopping on public Wi-Fi networks, trying to work remotely. There's tons of social media pleas. You can see, the list goes on and on. Lots of phishing attempts, and we'll take a look at a couple. Here's a phishing using malicious COVID-19 related link. And this actually I pulled from TrustWave, and you can see the link down there. It's a pretty interesting theme, although our IT person, Jeff, who helped me get set up for this call, and does a fantastic job here at Miller Johnson keeping us all safe. This attack that we're about to walk through is very similar to the attack that he educated our staff on like two years ago, right after the 2016 election. And so these themes ring true. Here's a CDC Health Network alert, supposedly, and you can see, someone is trying to circulate an updated list of new cases around your city are available here. It's a cdc.gov link. It looks like one, but it's really not. That's a pretty good looking link, actually. Like if we were running a know before phishing training, which we've had many clients run know before phishing trainings. If you don't know what that is, feel free to give me a call. But it's basically an online. It's a web-based phishing program that sends out emails a lot like this and can train your staff on being able to spot these. This one's a good one, and I left it up there so you can see it. It sends you to, and I'll get back to that screen, but it sends, that website that we were looking at doesn't exist. And you can see, there is no new cases -cities.html. And then maybe then we've got phishing using a malicious COVID-19 related attachment. Here's letter from the president. This one actually seems a little bit easier to spot, right? The World Health Organization was informed of a group of cases of pneumonia in Wuhan. They're kind of talking about this. Currently, there are reports confirming 9 cases of 2019 COVID infection in New Zealand, and there's an attachment with it. You probably wouldn't expect a letter from the president, so you may not be as tempted to click on this. But when you look at the bottom, there's a PDF. You try to open up the PDF. It goes to this classic Adobe secure online document. Click here to access via Microsoft or PDF Reader. Then it asks you to go sign in. Please select your mail provider. If you could see, the link at the top, it's really hard to see. You would see that it doesn't look right. But it asks you to sign in, and then you go and, you sign in, right? And in fact, that's where I think this slide was meant to go here. You can kind of see up in the corner there, rightblinds.net, Corona. I mean, it just doesn't, it just doesn't look right. So you enter in your credentials, and then this person has your, access to your email account, and then can exploit your email account from there. So it's the same old attack vectors, phishing emails, Trojan horse attachments, social engineering. We just handled a data security incident where there was a remote desktop and RDP like brute force attack, which basically is like, there was an internal computer that was just kind of sitting on the network available from the web, and someone found it, and a bad actor just attacked it and brute forced their way in. So there's a million ways to get in, and I'm guessing everyone's seen those presentations where you walk through, like, the sky is falling, there's holes in your network, there's holes in the way you're doing IT business. I don't want to spend any more time on that. I want to jump into the rest of this and get to the law and insurance and other risk mitigation solutions. So let's go. So this is cybersecurity law. So I want to start with the recent executive order, and you may have seen other presentations on this, but the governor, Whitmer, issued the executive order 2020-21. It's called the temporary requirement to suspend activities that are not necessary to sustain or protect life. Section 1 provides this order must be construed broadly to prohibit in-person work that is not necessary to sustain or protect life. Section 2 provides in part, all individuals currently living within the state of Michigan in order to stay home or at their place of residence. And then Section 4 says, provides an exception. No person or entity should operate a business or conduct operations that require workers to leave their homes or places or residence except to the extent that those workers are, 1, necessary to sustain or protect life, or 2, to conduct minimum basic operations. And that's where a lot of the work that we've been doing this week, we've been living in this order. We've been trying to help all of our clients understand the order, the stay-at-home order, understand stay-at-home orders across the United States. There's dozens of them now, and there's even countywide, and some of them conflict with the Michigan order. Some of our clients have operations in multi-states, and we've been interpreting what this means. And, at its basic, the Section 4 exception provides that, critical infrastructure workers, or what I call CIWs sometimes, and their service providers and suppliers necessary workers, those are the workers that fit within the workers that are necessary to sustain or protect life. And then second is the workers necessary to conduct minimum basic operations. And if you go to the order online, you can go to the order and you can see where critical infrastructure workers are listed. They're listed incorporating the DHS guidance. And then the minimum basic operations, there's an analysis for that. So, as far as CIWs, the EO guidance, relevant to cybersecurity and IT security. So, there's 2 types of workers that can do in-person work. The executive order provides guidance: communications and information technology workers, to the extent that they're necessary to sustain or protect life. And then you've got the DHS guidance, workers performing cybersecurity functions at healthcare and public health facilities who cannot practically work remotely. And then we see even just your basic IT person working at data center operators, including system administrators, HVAC and electrical engineers, security personnel, IT managers, data transfer solution engineers. That shows up in the DHS guidance that's incorporated in the executive order. And those folks can work in person, under certain circumstances. And then you just have And then you just have the, if you're not a CIW, that a person that's necessary to sustain or protect life, but you're a person, and we'll go back to this slide, a worker necessary to conduct minimum basic operations. There's actually an analysis within the executive order that says, okay, a worker who is necessary to support remote workers is a worker who is necessary to conduct minimum basic operations. And so, if you're a worker and you're required to support your remote workforce, because the idea of the executive order is to keep everybody at home, then you're a worker that can fit within this conduct minimum basic operations. And you can go into work, you can go into the network operating center, you can go to where your servers are at, and you can support people by working in person. And we as a firm, we have a giant team that are working day and night to interpret this executive order and help people understand how this fits into their operations, whether they can bring in people, bring in their cybersecurity folks, bring in their IT managers, whether they have to work from home or they can work from the office or the network operating center. We can help you work through that. We can provide opinion letters, and we can make that understandable for you, because these executive orders are clear as mud oftentimes, and they involve like a 5 or 6 part analysis, and we've tried to break it down for everybody. So here's the basic, kind of moving on from the executive order and remote workers. The executive order has created a ton more remote workers, right? And I'm actually working remotely right now. But what do even in light of these remote workers, what do all businesses have? What are their basic data security obligations? And, there's a duty to protect and a duty to disclose. And, it's basically to provide, reasonable or appropriate security systems for media and data relative to prevent breaches, to detect breaches, to respond to breaches. And, there's no one size fits all solution, right? So if you're a covered entity, you're a healthcare provider, you're going to have a much different data security landscape than a manufacturer. However, both the manufacturer and healthcare entity have a duty to implement reasonable safeguards, and those are, what we call the physical, administrative, and technical safeguards to protect data. I mean, all laws, all laws have that in there. There's a duty to disclose under certain circumstances to affected parties and to regulators potentially. And all of this bakes down to mitigating or trying to prevent sensitive data from being lost, and then once it's been lost, mitigating the resulting damage. The source of obligations come from a patchwork of statutes and regulations, common law, which is judge-made law, rules of evidence, rules of professional responsibility, contract. This is the one where like manufacturers always say, well, I don't have any obligations. And I say, well, what kind of manufacturing you do? And, we do manufacturing for the auto companies. And I say, well, I can guarantee you that your customers and their customers and the OEMs have tons of contractual requirements to have data security and data privacy protections. So I don't, there isn't a sector of society that isn't impacted by data security and privacy laws now. So, there's HIPAA. I noticed a couple of healthcare entities. So what's the federal law considerations under the COVID context? And, I was just on a presentation with my former mentor, an associate of my former mentor. I was an attorney at McDermott, Will and Emery for several years, and I worked with the privacy and cybersecurity attorney there, Heather Sussman, and then she went on. She's now like the co-chair of the global practice group at Oric. I saw a presentation that Oric did, and this was, basically the slide that they provided there in the guidance that she had. And I agree with her, is just, with COVID-related instances, there's a balancing test. There may be opportunities to share PHI without consent, but really, the standards HIPAA analysis applies, right? So there's only very limited circumstances that a covered entity can be permitted to disclose, protected health information or PHI without patient authorization. And those are listed there. There's nothing new there. We don't see any new guidance necessarily from DHS or new rules or regulations coming out. But, the consensus is follow the minimum necessary standard, right? If you're a covered entity and you've got an employee, that has a COVID issue, you may be able to disclose this information under certain circumstances without consent. But you know what? You might as well go try and get consent. You might as well be prepared to determine what type of disclosure you're going to do, maybe to coworkers that work immediately next to the person. But you're still going to want to use minimum necessary standard, right? So even if there is a disclosure of any kind, whether it's through consent of the person who is affected, or some other lawful basis to disclose PHI, you'll want to use the minimum necessary standard. You can probably de-identify the person. You can probably make them somewhat anonymous and still deal with the issues at hand to protect the other employees, to make sure public health authorities need to know what they need to know. And so that's the analysis there. So that's HIPAA. I mean, HIPAA's a big statute. It's been around for a long time. The 2013 is when high-tech was implemented, and that really brought about a lot of changes to the way, healthcare law or healthcare operations operate under the law. But here's the Michigan Data Breach Notification Statute. Michigan's got this. It's actually it's not a fairly robust data breach notification statute compared to other states. It applies to any person, legal entity, or agency that owns or licensed data included in the database. So I get this question a lot from clients. I don't personally, my company does not personally collect personal information. It's all third-party service providers. And I say, well, you own that data. And so these laws apply. And basically what the data breach notification statute does is it protects Michigan residents' personal information. Then it defines it, what personal information is. It's, first and last name connected with a social security number, driver's license number, or state identification number, or financial account numbers, right? And this is the analysis, right? So if there's a data security incident and it involves Michigan data subjects, you're going to have to go to this part of the statute to determine whether you need to provide notice. And you only need to provide notice if you run through this analysis and you find that, oh, there's been a first name or initial with last name linked to one or more following data elements. And a lot of times, our clients don't technically meet this standard, and we still advise them to provide notice because the idea here, right, as I mentioned, is mitigating any potential loss that could happen. And back in the old days, 4 or 5 years ago, everyone was so afraid of notifying affected individuals because they would be admitting that they've had a data security incident, and there's potential shame in that or lost business. And a lot of times, the data security incident is not a big deal. However, it will become a big deal for your employees or your customers if they start losing money or having their accounts compromised. And so we just say, just give notice, and we'll go from there. So here's how Michigan defines security breach, which is an unauthorized access and acquisition of data that compromises the security or confidentiality of computerized personal information. And that data is unencrypted or unredacted. And so here, again, here's another area that's like a safe harbor. If the data was encrypted, then you don't have to notice, right? You don't have to provide notice to the affected individuals. And, what we say here all the time is that even if we don't technically meet the definition of a security breach, we may want to provide notice, especially if it's just your employees, right? If it's just your employees and it appears like something's happened and you're not sure if it was encrypted, or that someone has the encryption key, like, you might as well provide notice and mitigate any potential loss. I mean, that's not what we always recommend, but it happens a lot given the frequency of data security incidents that can be classified as a security breach. Here's the no harm safe harbor built into the Michigan law. And here's the timing. A lot of these notification statutes have, Michigan is without unreasonable delay. How clear is that? It's not very clear, right? So what is unreasonable delay? If my credit card information was stolen, I would think 1 or 2 days without knowing it would be unreasonable delay. But, essentially what this does, it allows businesses to sit down and think about whether they've had a data security incident or not. And this is where your data breach response team comes in, right? Your data breach response team is going to be there, and it's going to be HR, it's going to be IT, it's going to be outside legal, inside compliance, inside HR. And you're going to sit down and you're going to figure out whether notice needs to be provided and when it needs to be provided. And what's nice about the unreasonable delay standard is that it gives you some time. Usually a good data security incident response where we feel like something's left the building, it takes about a week to figure out exactly what happened. Not exactly what happened, to figure out what we think happened and decide whether we're going to go down the road of notifying. However, in Europe, now you've got Europe under GDPR, it says you have to notify affected persons within 72 hours of determining that there's been a breach. And what we advise clients there, and what we advise clients under the Michigan Data Breach Notification Statute, which, by the way, is very similar to a lot of statutes. So if you go online, you can see the grid. You can find out, all these states have these timing portions in there, and a lot of them are without unreasonable delay. However, Florida's now gone to 30 days, and California has its own, timing, and Washington has its own timing. And I haven't memorized them all, and really, I wouldn't advise you to, but essentially, the clock starts ticking, and a regulator, we've dealt with a lot of regulator inquiries after data breach notifications. Regulators are just going to want to see you working through a data security incident in a methodical, responsible manner. And really, that's all, in my experience, after, I came up as a white-collar civil and criminal defense attorney in the Boston office of McDermott. that's all regulators really want to see. I mean, of course, there's technical violations, and if you've just done something that violates the law, they're not going to like that. However, under data security laws, it's really about taking the reasonable efforts and the responsible efforts to mitigate any losses. So there's a new, I guess it's not that new now, it's about a year old, a little over a year old, but it goes into effect 2021, that applies to those entities that are registered with the Department of Insurance and Financial Services. The Act contains, specific notification requirements. The Act requires licensees to develop, implement, and maintain a comprehensive written information security program based on the licensee's risk assessment. So that's where we come in, and we help you develop an information security program, right, with policies and procedures, and that's where your IT, on the IT side, they come up with their own information security program. It requires licensee to provide affected with notice of the breach without unreasonable delay. You see that unreasonable delay again. However, you got to notify DIFs within 10 business days after a determination that a data breach has occurred. Consumer means individual, applicant, policyholder, and insured, beneficiary, claimant, and certificate holder. Cybersecurity event, so it's got its own definitions that you're going to need to be aware of. Information security program, again, it's the I was just looking at our questions to make sure I'm following along here. But you can see, the information security program requirements in there. It protects non-public information, so it's a little bit different than the Michigan data breach notification statute that we were looking at. But it's also very similar, right? This one includes biometric records, but non-public information seems quite a bit broader than the personal information standard in the other law. You can see how it's much broader, right? Any information or data except age or gender in any form or medium created by or derived from a healthcare provider or consumer that can be used to identify a particular consumer that relates to any of the following. And so, it's a much broader. So this law, it requires you to implement it, and this is where we get into the risk mitigation portion of this presentation, right? So what do we need to do to mitigate risk related to cybersecurity? And it's designating an employee that is responsible for the information security program. It's baked right into the law. Identify reasonable or foreseeable internal and external threats that could result in unauthorized access, transmission, disclosure, misuse, and so on. Assess the likelihood of damage. I mean, it's just basically create a program, create a plan, and do it now before something happens. There's the California law. We can advise you on that. What must folks do to comply with that law? Same thing. You need to implement an information security program that includes the policies and procedures, that includes training, that includes insurance, includes all of those things. And that's what you need to do. There's a new Colorado law. What is the Colorado? You need to implement and maintain reasonable security procedures and practices that are appropriate to the nature of the PI and the size of the business. And so, you can kind of see, here's the 30-day notice requirement in Colorado. So let's get into cyber risk insurance, right? So what's nice about going through cyber risk insurance is that it also deals with risk mitigation strategies. So what does cyber risk insurance really ask you to do? And what I love about walking through cyber risk insurance is, I say the number one risk mitigation tool that everyone on this call can do right now is place cyber liability insurance. It's been commoditized in the last 4 or 5 years. Rates have gone down a lot, and what's nice about placing cyber risk insurance, if you've never done it, is it forces you to put together a risk mitigation plan and a cyber cybersecurity plan, right? Because it says, like, how many people do you have, and you start doing the data mapping. So here's the underwriting questionnaire. Where's your data? Indicate whether it's encrypted. You can see on, this is pulled from a traveler's long form questionnaire. Are you a healthcare provider, a business associate, or covered entity? If you haven't asked yourself that question, or you don't know the answer to that, it'd be really good to know the answer to that, because that affects your entire landscape of how you operate. Are you affected by GDPR? Do you have a chief privacy officer? That's part of a good plan. Is there a publicly available privacy policy which has been reviewed by an attorney? Have you done sensitive data classification and inventory procedures? Have you done data retention, discretion, and record keeping procedures? Do you have an annual privacy and information security training for employees? Do you restrict access to sensitive data and systems based on job functions? So when I start working with a client to mitigate risk in this space, I literally walk through a insurance policy questionnaire, right? I mean, that's the place to start. And it can really help you kind of understand where you're at in mitigating risk. And then here's the network security controls. Do you have a CISO? Do you have, and this is where we get into some of the tech stuff that I recommend for everybody, right? So you have active firewall technology, up-to-date antivirus software on your all networks, computers, and mobile devices. Is there a process in place to regularly download, test, and install patches? Do you have an intrusion detection system? And you don't need to have all of these. You just need to have some of them. And then once you have some of them, you can figure out if you need more. But really, it all starts with identifying your data, figuring out what you have, and making these updates. And all of the practical advice that I'm hearing from IT managers and all the webinars that I've attended in the last 2 weeks all say, this is the heart of their presentation. And because I'm a lawyer, I want to spend more time on the law and thinking about the law and thinking about risk mitigation efforts that don't involve IT. But here it is. Get these things: multi-factor authentication for administrative or privileged access. Update passwords. We just dealt with a breach right before the COVID-19 crisis that was, administrative password was the super administrative password for the entire network was very easy to guess. And that's a simple change that everyone can do right now, is go update your passwords. And then do you deal with PCI, your payment card controls? Review your contracts with your payment card providers. Do you have a business continuity, disaster incident response plan? That sort of thing. All of those things. This kind of feels like maybe a little late to be asking yourself these questions, but if, maybe now's the time, right, to sit and do we have vendor controls in place? Should we be looking at our vendor agreements and seeing what's there and what's not there? And then do we have backups? Here's indicate which of the following services are outsourced. We'll be talking about outsourcing some of these things in a second. Have you ever experienced a loss? Has there ever been a breach? And, whether you answer yes or no, it's going to be, I'm guessing you're probably going to answer yes, right? You've probably had a network or computer system disruption due to an intentional attack or system failure. And then, you're going to want to deal with limits, right? So what are your limits? And this is where we get into, here's your standard, insuring agreement, first party coverages, third party coverages. Placing insurance is a big deal. And, you're going to want, these are your standard first party coverages because that's where the costs come from, right? So if we go back to the beginning of the presentation, we looked at where the costs for data breaches come from. And these are the coverages that are going to provide, reimbursement for those costs, right? So crisis, management event expenses, security breach remediation and notification expenses, computer program and electronic, all of these first party coverages, to me, in my mind, unless you're a healthcare provider, are probably the most important because this is where all your costs are going to come from. And this is where I've had to work with insurance companies, sometimes delicately, sometimes more forcefully, to get them to pay for the breach. And they will pay. I mean, knock on wood, every time. I think Jeff and I are batting 1,000 here. Whenever we have to bring in insurance and, Jeff and I get approved as the data breach counsel and we get these costs reimbursed. So, you've got third-party coverages. This is where the regulators come in, is, third-party coverages are when claims are made against you. And this is where, we've had to ask for reimbursement for responding to regulator inquiries. And here's the thing is right now we're in a privacy landscape that if something happens and someone complains to a regulator is going to send out an email or a letter, and they're just going to ask for more information. It's going to be a really short email, a really short letter. It's just going to say, we want to know more about this. And that's sometimes can be a $10,000, $15,000 exercise, right? Because then you've got to make sure what you're telling the regulator is completely accurate. You'll want to determine how much you can disclose and you can't disclose, et cetera, et cetera. And we're seeing more and more of that. And third-party coverages are becoming more important. So we're running out of time here, but there's not much left to the presentation. Sometimes if we have more time, I walk through each of these and we would talk about these in terms of data breach response and crisis management and kind of dive deeper into it because I think it's helpful. But, here you can kind of just see that placing insurance is a lot like signing up for a new law. I mean, if you look at this stuff here, each one of these bolded terms is defined somewhere in the policy. And so I encourage you, if you do place insurance, have in-house counsel take a look at it. If you don't have in-house counsel, have someone who is really good with these insurance agreements take a look at it. And, Jeff and I can take a look at it, and we know what these things are supposed to say. We know what they don't say. We've read it, dozens and dozens of these. We can work through this type of labyrinth of, ridiculous labyrinth of definitions and coverages, and we can do it very quickly and see if you've got the right coverage or if you do have coverage for an event and make it happen for you. So, these are just examples. I'm going to blow through them. These are just meant for illustrative purposes. We would never walk through this type of detail, but you can see all these coverages, what they actually entail. So, funds transfer fraud, regulatory defense, it's kind of insane. The cyber risk mitigation solutions, we've already talked about them. I mean, it's baked into how you create an information security program, how you put together your policies and procedures, how you place insurance, et cetera. So I don't know if this is going to This is going to kick me off right at 9. But essentially, that we've already discussed it. So I'm looking for questions here. So someone asked if Chubb Insurance had a ransomware attack. I'm not aware, but ransomware has been on the rise. It's been the most prevalent thing we've had to deal with. I'll actually okay, so I have been told there's no hard out, so I'm not going to get just shut down at 9. So maybe I'll just flip through. Flip through the remaining. I'm also running out of voice here, but we've already talked about a lot of these. Cybersecurity assessment, update policies and procedures, update IT security, place insurance. I mean, that's really it. I've got a few more slides here. Maybe we can just actually blow through them in a couple minutes, to the extent folks are still on and they're still able to hang. So, we've already talked about all of these, and they do become redundant once I get to them. But here's some good takeaways. Everything we've talked about today involves providing notice, getting consent, updating security, minimizing data, anonymizing data, dealing with data retention, updating employee handbooks. I mean, all the basic concepts of good cybersecurity hygiene apply in this COVID-19 context, and they can help you mitigate risks. We've got this new zero trust thing that I've been hearing about. I just did a presentation for a work cited the other day. We talked a lot about zero trust. Zero trust is something that our clients will often tell employees: don't trust a link, don't trust an email, don't trust anything until it's been verified. Don't trust anything until it's been verified. And essentially that's what zero trust is. I don't know if that makes complete sense for your organization, but it's becoming kind of a big movement is to move to the zero trust model. Again, determine who needs remote access, prioritize the workers, establish a remote workforce policy, set expectations, encourage your employees to work in a separate area of the home, limit printing. I think a lot of these are common sense, but this is it. These are kind of the basic recommendations that everyone that I've seen is doing and recommending. And then here's some of the IT stuff. Miller Johnson's been working with Microvisions over the last 6 months or 7 months or so. We've developed this fortified cyber compliance program. It's almost rolled out, but essentially what it does is it tries to marry up IT with legal, and take a holistic approach, right? So a lot of our clients come from clients calling IT managed service providers saying, hey, I want a firewall or I want multi-factor authentication. And then, the managed service provider calls us and says, well, hey, we're actually got into the middle of doing all this IT work, and I think they need privacy counsel. So we're developing this program. You can learn more about it by calling us. And here's our contact information. You know, if you call my work line, it'll go direct to my cell phone, and I have my cell phone on me all the time. So if you have any more questions, please reach out to me. I see here's one question. Could you touch on employee responsibilities and obligations of ERISA as it pertains to retirement plans? Chris Garrison, I'll have to follow up with you on that one. I think we're out of time, and that's a big topic. So we'll do that. Other than that, thank you so much for attending. It's 9:05. I'm going to let everyone kind of go on with their day. I know everybody's got a lot to do. So thank you very much for attending. I know it was a lot of information, and everybody stay safe, be well, and please reach out to us if you have anything else you'd like to talk about.